Hello, oodles and noodles. I have returned after a lengthy hiatus. Don't ask me where I was. I don't know. One moment, I was making videos. The next, I was not. And now we have returned. And I wasn't really sure how I wanted to come back into things. Was I going to do a bunch of reviews? I wasn't sure. I've been kind of iffy about whether or not I wanted to continue making videos. I read a lot, and it's been really intense the last couple of months. Even probably 5 times more than I usually read. I've just been finishing books at an insane rate. And so when I would think about doing reviews, it just seemed overwhelming because I was just spending so much time reading that the idea of stopping to do a review just made no sense. I'd blow through like 3 books in a series, and it's a ghost. I'll pick that up after. Yeah, I was reading too much, and so the idea of just stopping to review book 1 of something just clogged me up. I just didn't know what to do, so I just obviously focused on reading because that's what I love to do. Not that I don't do other things. I've been doing loads of other stuff. A little bit too much Genshin Impact, that's for sure. But I've been reading an insane amount lately. And I wanted to come back and just talk about a series as a whole that I've already done 4 book reviews on. So the first 4 books in the Codex Alera series. And I was thinking, should I do book 5? Should I do book 6? But I figured, you know what? If you've read through the first 4 books, you're there. You're going to finish the series or you're not. But most people who've gone through 4 books are going to go and do the last 2 books. I'm not going to be able to say anything special overall. I might do a whole series review, but maybe this will end up actually turning out to be that series review, because really what I want to talk about is, why isn't the Codex Alera more popular? Why is it that when people talk about big epic series or really famous shows that got adapted from books, we're always getting, we get the typical Wheel of Time, Brandon Sanderson books, the Malazan books. You get these big epics. But when even people talk about just famous series overall, the Codex Alera never really comes up. If you look on YouTube, most people have done like a review maybe of book 1, but it just doesn't really come about that people talk about this. Now, I think partially it is because Jim Butcher has his Dresden Files series, and it just blew the Codex Alera out of the water in terms of popularity. It's urban fantasy, it's a lot more accessible for quite a few people, I think, and it's just wildly popular. I've only read book 1, which, to be honest, I'm 50-50 on. It was really fun, but it didn't really draw me in particularly. I think I'm just not a huge urban fantasy fan, so that's just where I'm at that. I do have plans to read the other books in the series, or at least a couple more, to give myself a more fair idea of whether or not I want to pursue the series as a whole, because it is huge. I don't know how many books are out now, at least like over 10, 12, 15. I'm not really sure. So it's a really big undertaking, and I'm on the fence about it still. But the Codex Alera, 6 books, they're decently hefty books. I mean, I think the smallest you're probably looking at like over 300 pages. The larger ones go into like 500, 600, 700 pages, something around there. And the series, as is comparatively to the Dresden Files, is completely different. I mean, this is essentially a very small basis in history series where we have this, there's a myth that a legend that exists in our actual reality about this Roman legion that went missing a long time ago. And this story runs with that, in that Roman legion got transported to another world. And on this world, they eventually garnered the ability to work alongside what are known as Furies, these elementals, essentially, that are tied in with the land and tied in with people. It's a little bit unclear the way the series sort of explains it, whether or not people just create their own Fury out of their own body, or they're latching on always to Furies that are out in nature, because there are Furies that are passed down from family members to other family members. There are Furies that are more sentient in a certain sense, in that they have more embodiment to them, and others that are more seemingly just elementals that have no real sentience at all. So there's a little bit of ambiguity in how Furies are portrayed within the series. I think the author was developing ideas Jim was developing the ideas as he went along, and so sometimes he threw things in and added more fleshed out ideas later on in the series, but there's still some kind of hiccups in a certain sense of how it's explained. But overall, they're elementals and Alerans. So these are the humans in this world, the supposed Romans, who tied themselves over to these Furies. So people can have enhanced strength, speed, the ability to obviously shoot fire, manipulate water. There's all sorts of different abilities. They, of course, can strengthen themselves. There's manipulation of the aging process. They don't seem to age necessarily past probably like 100, 120 years, I think, the way it's sort of described. But they do stay physically robust and much more youthful, depending on your strength levels and whether or not it seems to be only if you have watercrafting. So watercrafting can obviously aid with healing and with age-related issues. So, for example, Gaius, the emperor throughout most of the series, I believe he's supposed to be in his 70s or 80s, so he's an old man, and it is explained that his age is affecting him quite a lot, but he's still very, very powerful, especially when he can utilize his Furies. He looks much, much younger. He's very, very strong. And so they get a whole host of these abilities. Now, of course, life isn't easy. The reason why they really, really need these abilities is because there is a host of other sentient races that live on this planet. Now, it's not really said out loud, but you get the gist that almost all these races, or a big chunk of them, don't come from this planet. They have a history of coming from other places, other worlds. So they were brought over to this place, and none of the other races have access to Furies, but they are much, much stronger. Some of them do have their own magical abilities. For example, we have the Marat, who are a humanoid race that can essentially bond with animals and gain strength through them. So depending on the animal that they bond, they can gain much greater physical strength, speed, dexterity, senses, of course, sense of smell, sense of taste. They have a whole society. We have the Kanin, that are essentially giant sort of wolf dog creatures. They sort of sound like cat creatures sometimes. It's a bit of a mix. They're gigantic. They're hugely powerful, hugely strong, and they do have their own sort of blood magic that some of their people can use. We do have other races, of course. I'm blanking on the name of the race, but there's a race that essentially lives out in the ice-cold tundra, and they can manipulate. They're sort of Fury crafting. It's not really clear whether or not they are purely Fury crafting, like they have tied into the Furies themselves, but they are manipulating the Furies to some degree so that they can use the ice and snow and water as a weapon, and they're telepathic. That's how they communicate with each other. And high-level watercrafters can do that as well. They can sort of communicate through the mind. And so there's a host of different races. There's other races that are sort of talked about offhand that have been essentially wiped out by the Alerans as they conquered over their continent. And so there's been many races before, and there are many races that still exist in the present, not counting the ultimate enemy of the series, the Vord, who are... I don't want to get too much into that in case you haven't read the series, but there are a load of different races. There's so much in this series. We are primarily following only a handful of characters. The MC is Tavi Octavian, who is a young boy who is considered a freak and outcast. He does not have access to Fury crafting. He cannot Fury craft. But through his ingenuity and his intelligence and his ability to work through things, he is thrust into a lot of scenarios and manages to work itself out. There's a lot more to this story. There's so much to his background, his backstory, the characters around him. So his aunt Isana, Amara, who's a cursor. Cursors are essentially people who work directly for the emperor himself and who go out and do tasks and basically protect the kingdom. And we also have Bernard, who's sort of the love interest to Amara and the uncle of Tavi. And he has his own little backstory. You see a little bit of his point of view, but not really. You're pretty much going through most of the whole series with the 3 points of view of Tavi, Isana, and Amara. And they all bring their own strengths and weaknesses to the fore. Tavi, of course, it's a lot of his ingenuity, his creativity. Amara has that also, but she's really much more of a I'd say a dedicated, loyal, like warrior who's just really, really capable of bulldozing through stuff. Isana is one of the most interesting characters. She's a watercrafter, so she's not really a warrior per se, but you get to see, even though you don't not see this with Amara and Tavi, but you see a lot of the political intrigue, and there's so much political intrigue in this story. The threats from within, the threats from without that are happening in this kingdom. It's this huge turmoil as just things are layered on book by book by book in terms of the personal tribulations that each character is going through and the people around them, the different threats and how they're all interconnecting, the backstabbing, the gray. Like, so much of this series lives in the gray. There is no really good people and bad people. Even within our main character, they're forced to do certain things that are not exactly kosher. But overall, that's what makes this series so fantastic. Whether it's the complexity of the magic system, even though there is that issue of ambiguity, there's so much there to layer on into the systems of magic that exist across the whole world and how it's changing as our main character is interacting and learning stuff and going along. Just the issues that are dealt with by the characters as they're dealing with the corruption within their own society, the political intrigue, the people who are just power hungry, slavery and dealing with those issues. So there's a lot of, and this is where the historical aspect of it, besides the whole the legend of this legion disappearing, but there's a lot of that Roman history that gets pulled in and how their society is structured, the issues of slavery and how they utilize people, and the hierarchy, structural caste system that's all fudged up in this series that the main character has to deal with, which ties into also a lot of the intrigue and politics of how he ended up being who he is, the backstory of himself, his aunt, his family, how they have to interact with other races and try to deal with that, how other races look upon them, even though some of these races are extremely brutal and very violent and even more warlike than the Alerans. They still sometimes look down upon the Alerans because the Alerans treat their own citizenry so terribly in some ways. And so we get so many different philosophical issues that are being dealt with. And tied into all this is some really great main character development and side character development and even enemy development. Like I said, everything is in the gray here. There's no simple black and white, this boss is just like this enemy is just like that, this main character is simply the good guy. No, they're dealing with so many issues and there's so much complexity going on. Now, it's not an epic to the scale of Wheel of Time here. We're looking at 6 books. It's not to that degree, but that's what makes this series so impressive and why I'm always kind of sad that it's not talked about at all. This series would be amazing as an adaptation. Would be very, very difficult from a CGI perspective and showing off the Furies, but in terms of the political fucking just shit going on constantly, it's Game of Thrones on crack cocaine. Like, it's huge. There's loads of stuff, and there's so much. Not only really cool personal fights that happen in terms of magic and combat, but loads of this series is just tons of military campaigns going on, and it's done so well with creativity and intrigue. It's not just two armies smarting up against each other. We get to see Tavi really expand as a general essentially as he goes along, and there's so much there. There's so much there. The series manages really beautifully to make you meet so many different people of so many different races and strata and belief systems and philosophies across this world that is just bashing itself to pieces, and manages to make it that, most importantly, You don't have anyone that makes you want to shoot yourself in the head. There's a lot of series. Wheel of Time is a perfect example. I love the Wheel of Time series. I've read it so many times. I'm not going to talk about the TV show. I did a small review. I was kind of hopeful at first, but that's been dashed completely. But the Wheel of Time series is very, very impressive. It is also one of the most frustrating series to read. There are so many characters that make me want to kill myself. The lack of intelligence and communication as people just go through so much horrendous crap just because they can't seem to talk properly in that series drives me nuts. Even in regards to enemies, a lot of enemies are kind of dullish sometimes. We don't really get that sense of tying you into their story as well and what the bad person is doing and why they're doing it. Why are they like this? Codex Alera doesn't have that issue. The few enemies, even the simplistic enemies, the ones that they're there for you to hate because these are just purely bad people, you can see how the system made them, how they got where they are because of their society, because of the nature of fury crafting and the hierarchy, the world itself. Jim Butcher has a really, really accessible writing style, and he made it so that no matter how many characters are in a scene, no matter how many people we're being introduced to in the next book of the series, no matter how many new enemies it's layered on so well, so slowly. It's not perfect, of course. No book is perfect. There's still issues, and I'm sure it's going to also depend on what you like, of course. But things are layered on so well together that there's never a point in a series where you're bored. There's always something happening, and it's never a waste of time. There's always character development. There's always world development. There's always race development. There's always something you're learning, something interesting happening, even in the most mundane conversations. Everything gets built upon itself to the point where you are never left kind of in a dull moment where, oh God, it's just like an information dump or this or that. There's always something cool, and it always ties into what your character is going to use, what's going to happen in the world. It suddenly explains something that didn't really make sense before, but now it does. It is a beautifully crafted world. Again, it doesn't have this gigantic complexity like something like Wheel of Time or Stormlight, which is building this epicness, but it manages to take we'll say a continent that's at war and make it so interesting and so fun, no matter whose perspective you're going from, whether it's the main character Tavi or his Aunt Asana or Amara or even Fidelius, who's another character we do see a lot of point of view, who's sort of the bad guy but not the bad guy. He's got a great arc. One of the best arcs I've ever seen in a series is Fidelius' arc. And even though he's not a consistent point of view, you manage through the eyes of the other characters and through the momentary points of view we have with that character to get this great connection with him that eventually grows into something really satisfying as the series progresses. So it's a great series. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. I don't really know why people don't talk about it more. Again, maybe it's because it was overshadowed by Jim Butcher's other work. Maybe the Dresden Files just was too big for the Codex Alera to really push through. But quite frankly, it is, I'd say, top 5, if not top 3 of the best fantasy series I've ever read, in that I can pick this book up and read the series 3, 4, 5 times a year. It never gets boring. There's always something more. There's so much there in its potential. And I genuinely think people should read it. read it more often, and gosh, do I wish it would be made into a series. It would be so good. You can't even find really much artwork. There's practically no artwork at all, even though the series has so much there to make in artwork. It's so cool. The Fury system, the enemies within it, the world that's there is just rife for people to make content about, and it's just not happening, and it's frustrating. This is a shout out to Jim Butcher for his, as far as I'm concerned, seminal fantasy work, because I don't consider the Dresden Files, even though they're really cool, it seems like it's interesting, it's just not on par with what he built, the Codex Alera, and it should get more popularity. Something, people. So here's to hoping I am going to hopefully get back into making videos again. I have to try to wrap my head around how I'm going to do this, because I don't want to stop my pacing of reading. I've read, I don't know how many books since the last time I made a video. Even during the times I was still making videos a little bit more consistently, I've read dozens of other books and I didn't make reviews of them at all. And I've read God knows how many now, at least 50, 60 books. Maybe I'm over exaggerating a bit there, but at minimum 40 books I've read in the last 2 months, if not more. It sounds psycho, but I'm literally reading like every day at a pace that's huge. Now, to be fair, I'm not reading like 600-800 page books each time, so that's how I'm able to blow through so many series so quickly. I've also gotten super into light RPG novels, and I find that medium to be extremely easy to read through, because there's just not as much exposition in terms of detail of what's happening in this specific flower, so you're able to kind of blow through it much more quickly. But yeah, I gotta figure this out, but I'm gonna try to get back a little bit into making videos. Maybe I'll make more things like this, where I just talk about a series as a whole instead of just trying to do one book, because that doesn't seem to be working for me really well. I don't know. I'll think about it. Well, thanks for everyone who stayed subscribed. I see I've actually popped a little bit over 200 now, which was kind of fun to see considering I hadn't made a video in so long. So enjoy. I hope this gets you into starting reading the Codex Alera, or at the very least pushes you to get back into it if you haven't finished the series. And for other people to make reviews also, I want to get the word out there. I love this book series. It should be more popular. Thanks for listening. Fare thee well, my friends.